With validation added, let's make sure we can update or save our recipe. So in the recipe added component, in onSubmit, I don't want to print the form, I want to do something with it. I want to save it in my array of recipes or update an existing one. So for this, I will need to change my recipe service. Right now, it has no method which allows me to add or update recipes. So I'll add it. Add recipe is a method I will need. And here I expect to get a recipe of type recipe or update recipe. Here I expect to get the index of the recipe I should update and then the new recipe, also of type recipe. In the add recipe case, I will simply take my recipes array and push a new item on it, this new recipe. And in the update recipe case, well, I will take my recipes array, take the element at the index I got here as an argument, and set it equal to the new recipe. That is the logic in the service for now. In the recipe component, recipe added component, we already inject this service. So in onSubmit, I now check if we are in edit mode. If we are, then on my service, I of course want to call the update recipe method because I'm interested in, guess what? Updating it. I don't want to create a new one because we're in edit mode. So here I will pass the ID of the recipe we're working on and then the new recipe. Let's create this new recipe outside of this if check. The new recipe simply is a new recipe using our recipe model, which you therefore have to import at the top. And with that imported, let's configure it. We actually have to pass all the data this constructor expects. So we can access this on our recipe form. Here on the value, we know we will have a name. We also know that here on the recipe form, on the value, we will have the description. Now that's getting long, so I'll put this over multiple lines here. The next argument we expect is the image path. And guess what? We know that our value will have that image path because we configured this form and it's controlled. So we know that all these values will be present once it is submitted. Also because we added validation to prevent, well, the submission of values which are not valid. And here the same for the array. We can simply use our recipe form, the value, which is stored in our array ingredients. Let's see if that is in the format we require it to be. So with that, we get our new recipe. Now we can simply pass this new recipe here as an argument to update recipe, or if we are not in edit mode, we will call the recipe service, the add recipe method, and pass our new recipe here. As a side note, since our value of the form has exactly the format of our recipe model and the same names like image path and so on, and this is something we especially wanted to make sure and we focused on, you can skip this step of saving it in a new constant and just pass this recipe form value, because the object stored here should have a valid format to fit one of our recipes. So that is a fine way of then taking really advantage of the reactive approach we're using here. With that, we're saving the data. Now let's see if that actually gets added to our list of recipes. If we type 2 here, well, I don't know, didn't change here. If I type something here and I click save, I don't see it, but we also don't get an error. Now let's check, do we submit it? Yes, we do, and this button is of type submit. What's wrong? Do you figure it out? We had this problem earlier in this course. It has something to do with our recipe service. We add and update recipes, but when we get a list of recipes, we return a copy here with the slice method. Therefore, this is not the same array we're using in our component as the one we're storing in this recipe service. So the one we're updating is not reflected in the components. We can simply use the same approach as in the shopping list service. I'll have my recipes changed event here, which is a new subject, and subject is imported from RxJS subject. Make sure to add this import. This will then pass an array of recipes as a value. And now here, when we call add recipe, I simply use this recipes changed event here, so to say, and emit a new value. This new value is a new copy of my recipes. So that's the same approach as we used in the shopping list service. The same, of course, here when we update a recipe. And as I mentioned earlier, in the shopping list service, you could refactor this into its own method. So with this added now, we can go to our recipe list component, which is in the end where we get our recipes, and in ng-on-init, I now want to listen to this event. So on the recipe service, on recipes changed, I will subscribe to that event. And if it did change, I know that I will receive a new array of recipes. That is the data we will get in this callback then. And then inside here, now I want to get my updated recipes, or simply set the recipes equal to the recipes I got passed here, I should say. That's an approach comparable or pretty similar to the one we used in the shopping list service. So let's save this, and now if we try to edit this recipe, put a 2 after the name, now it got updated here. And now if I add a new recipe here, some image that won't be displayed of course, just a test, and let's even add an ingredient, bread 10. If I hit save, we see it here, of course without an image, but that seems to work. And if I put this to the shopping list, bread was added. So that is all working here, and the errors you see here on the right, they simply occur because we can't fetch this image. So this is our recipe form now working, both for updating and for new recipes. Now let's see if there is something else we should do. Well, there are 2 things we should definitely do, 3 actually. We should enable this delete button, and when editing a recipe, no matter if creating a new one or editing an existing one, we should make the cancel button work, and upon hitting save, we should navigate away. Actually, that's the same which should happen when hitting cancel. So that would be a challenge for you again. Make all 3 buttons work, save and cancel to simply navigate away, and then also the delete button to delete our recipe. Here is my approach. What I want to do is I want to start with the delete button. For this, I'll start the recipe service and add a delete recipe method. Recipe, where I will get the index of the recipe, which should get deleted. And in here, I will then use my recipes array, call the splice method, and splice at the index 1 element to remove it. Thereafter, I'll call recipes changed and emit a copy of the updated recipes like this. That's the first step. Now I can call delete recipe from the recipe detail component, which is where we have this delete button, by adding a click listener on delete recipe. And here I will copy that and implement it in the TypeScript file here on delete recipe. And I simply want to reach out to the recipe service, call delete recipe, and now we also need the ID here. So we used it early in this course to have this more complicated way of navigating, but for deleting, now we really need it. So here we should add this ID as an argument. So before we test this, let's also make the cancel and save button work and let them navigate us away. So in the recipe edit component, which is where we have these buttons, here we should hook them up to an event listener. So cancel we should hook up. The other one already is automatically triggering the submission event. When we hit cancel, I want to execute on cancel. And in the recipe edit component TypeScript file, we don't need that import anymore, so we can remove it. But the thing I wanted to do is I will add the onCancel method. And in onCancel, well, here I simply want to navigate away. So for that we need the router of type router. So let's inject it here. Make sure to import the router type from @AngularRouter. And with that injected in onCancel, I can simply access the router and navigate, and I want to go up one level. If we were editing, this will take me back to the detail page. If we clicked on the new button, it will take me back to the recipes page. So for this to work, we need to tell Angular what our current route is, and we do already inject it here, the activated route. So with that, we can pass the second parameter relative to this route. So that happens if we click the cancel button. I actually want the same to happen once I submit the form. So here I will call onCancel, even though it sounds wrong, but we are done at this point. We can simply navigate away. Let's see if that all works. If I click cancel, we're back to our recipe. The same for this one. And if I do change something and hit save, we're also back to the updated recipe. And if we create a new one and I hit cancel, we're back to the please select the recipe state, which makes sense. And if I enter something here and click save, we're back to this state too. So this is our application working fine here. All these buttons working. Let's see if we can delete this recipe now. Looks almost okay, but we still see it here in the detail view, even though we deleted it. Can demonstrate this again for the schnitzel. See it? It's still here, even though we removed it. So that is something we need to update before we are finally done with this section. So we're almost done, but the delete button isn't entirely working as expected. It's updating the list, but we're staying on the page of the deleted recipe. So to change this, we need to go to the recipe detail component, which again is where the delete recipe button lives. And then on delete recipe, we simply need to navigate away. We already got the router injected here, so we can simply call this router navigate. And now I simply want to navigate to /recipes here. And with that, we should have the right user experience that once this updates here, that if I click delete here, it is deleted and we're taken back to the main view. So let's try this a final time here with spaghetti, searching for a fitting image for spaghetti. Let's pick this one here. And let's insert it here. And let's finally enter a description. Tasty spaghetti. Let's hit add ingredient to add some spaghetti, 10 let's say, and let's save the form. And this all works, but one thing is not working. Do you see which? The image. We're not getting a preview of the image here. So let's fix this in the next lecture before we finally move on.